That's just a mouthful. It's like shorten that some other shit. Thank you very much for coming. I'm really excited to give you an opening keynote this morning. This is very exciting, and I might say emerging work. This work around access and equity. On the one hand, it has a long tradition, and the Transitional Year program is an example of a program, a community initiative that has been breaking ground and paving the way for access and equity for mature students for decades, since the early 1970s, late 1960s actually. But in terms of the quote-unquote scholarly literature and research, there's not as much that has always been documented and focused on the experiences of mature students. So I'm going to give a bit of an introduction of what we even mean by mature students and talk about three strands of inquiry that have really led to the establishment of this research symposium. So, and I'll tell you a little bit of background. I always, when I teach my classes, I always try to say a little bit about my background and my take, because it's the academic one is specific. It's not one that, I'm not all things to all people. And I'm pretty social sciencey, but I want to say a little bit about that. I want to talk about sort of reflections I've had in the work that I've done, and just my experiences in my family, and interactions, and work with teaching and with students, and finally, so that, and then the scholarly literature, critical review of the scholarly literature, and then some specific reflections on the transitional year program, based on some, sort of light but important sort of content analysis of how we describe the history of the transitional year program on the website, and then some new and very important emerging archival research that's being done by coalition of community researchers who include us as a member here at University of Toronto. And that will all sort of culminate and sort of provide an explanation of the objectives of this research symposium and what we're hoping to accomplish today. So just a bit about my background. I'm pretty social science. I was, in terms of from a scholarly perspective, I received all of my undergraduate and graduate degrees in the United States. I was a psychology major as an undergraduate, liberal arts college, Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. And then I received my MA and PhD from the University of California, Berkeley in social and cultural studies in education. And that was really based more heavily in sociology and anthropology than it was in cultural studies, in those degrees called social and cultural studies. Okay. I came here really sort of focusing on urban education experiences of Black boys in urban schools. When I came here in 2006, that was considered a novel research program and line of inquiry, even though there were scholars that had been doing it for a long time, for instance, Carl James at Berkeley University. And the way I understood that work, based on my experience as a youth worker, and as someone who had always been involved in community organizing, I kind of thought about the experiences in schools as always being impacted by the urban communities in which they were situated. So for me, sort of urban education really was about understanding the social and cultural context of the city and how that impacted on teaching and learning in schools. That makes sense. So there's always this dialogue between in and out of school. I, it's interesting bringing that perspective to a school of education. And when I started out the curriculum teaching and learning department, because there was a lot of focus there on classroom teaching, right? On what it means to be the teaching profession. And we were with a group of my colleagues again to sort of move beyond sort of just thinking about teaching our urban school as just a classroom endeavor, but one that really involved the community. We were starting to have our teachers do basically internships in community organizations alongside getting their sort of teaching credential. But with the change in leadership and the decision to eliminate the ED program here at the University of Toronto, all of those programs basically ended, and a lot of the focus around urban education also came to and there have been cohorts in masters, there's a cohort for elementary and secondary, and training teachers who work in urban schools who focus on understanding and viewing themselves as members of those communities, not just as teachers that sort of drove in to do the work and then drive out at the end of the day. With the end of those programs, I really shifted my work to focus more on education and out-of-school spaces, sort of non-formal, informal, with community-based organizations, and thinking a lot about the youth and how they were sort of transitioning to adulthood, transitioning out of the high school context. This had a lot to do with my dissertation, was inspired by an event that I was doing. I was trained in anthropology, so I did my field work. I was hanging out with students during the day, and one day there was a fire drill, and the student that I was shadowing for the day actually just left school for the fire drill, and then sort of just ran out of the courtyard, ran out of school. And I was one of those dilemmas where you're, as a researcher, you think, like, oh man, and I said, boy, should I just stay here, wait till he comes back, or what should I do? But to me, it became sort of a metaphor of how education really takes us sort of out of school. As much as there's always this push and pull between sort of the community, what's going on in the community having more to teach us than maybe sometimes what the official curriculum, the formal curriculum, what the learning objectives are there. So I transitioned to the adult education community development, focusing on education, health, and welfare in and out of school of Black families, youth, and adults. And that seems to be this new department, leadership and adult education, seems to be a better place for this work. So my research program is pretty expansive, and even I have difficulty keeping track of it sometimes. It has 3 lines of inquiry that are related to the educational trajectories, transitions, and access, gay, bi, trans, MSM, sort of health literacy, and dispute resolution, and access to justice. So you'll see that they all sort of have to do with different sectors too. One being the education sector, the second one being public health, and then the third being sort of the justice sector. So all of these, group across all of these different sectors, different lines of inquiry, I'm really interested in issues of access, the sociocultural context of access, and doing work and research that is community-based and that leads to the development and capacity building in specifically African-American and Black communities. So that's a reasonable question across all of those. Why research symposium on, why organize research symposium on access and equity in higher education for mature students? So I want to take you through briefly these 3 sort of streams of thought and work that have inspired this research symposium. I want to start with my mother, because that is the and that's sort of the cover of the, the funeral program, the obituary. She passed away in 2012. You know, I don't know, not sort of incidental or ironic or anything. Sort of the year that I got tenure as well. When I first got all that out, feelings about it. But I've only recently thought about my mother's life and experience in the context of being a mature student in adult education. I have so many memories of my mother studying for school and for when she was getting her associate's degree and when she was pursuing her bachelor's degree. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up in Chicago and in Brooklyn. She graduated from Bushwick High School in the 1940s. She married my father in the 1950s. She married my father, William Floyd McCready, in 1961, and they were divorced, and they were separated in 1972. Some of that is one of the interesting things of the context in our sort of families. And I've learned this work also working with a lot of Black families. Sometimes we say we use the term divorce, but actually we're not always divorced, we're separated. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. We say like they're divorced, but actually they're separated legally. So it's sort of anyway, a whole other line where that's sort of important to keep that solution. I think like a number of women that when they separate from their husbands, it sort of prompts a whole new life around work. If they were sort of stay-at-home moms, and that's sort of the case for my mother, so that it prompted her to sort of go back to school. She earned an associate's degree in hospitality management, and at New York Technical College, I think it was called something else then. And she worked basically in food service and cafeterias at Riverside Church in New York, at New York University. And then a colleague of hers said, well, would you be interested in teaching sort of young people? And she had always been, I always think my mother as sort of a teacher. I grew up in a family of teachers that didn't really know a lot about saying they were teachers, if that makes any sense. So my mother was a teacher, my father was a girls' school teacher, but sometimes when I am having, taught in teacher education, a lot of students describe what it's like growing up in a family of teachers, and it's like, oh, my parents graded papers, or oh, my parents did this in school. So I don't remember any of that with my parents growing up, but I did grow up in a family of teachers, parents who were teachers. And the Job Corps program, which was established by Jimmy Carter about a year, decade, it's a really important program. It's a program that was a residential program that provided young people 18 to 24 an opportunity to earn a GED, general education diploma, and a trade. And it was paid for by the government. So you can imagine that was a really important program for so many sort of young adults to sort of get a high school diploma, basically their GED, and get a trade and begin to work. In terms of thinking about sort of that being the foundation important for transitioning to adulthood and living independently. My mother worked in a really rough one in the South Bronx of New York. If you can imagine that, sort of in the 80s and the 90s, that when the South Bronx was still like the South Bronx. Lots of lower income communities, Black and Latino families really struggling. Sort of lots of housing disputes, a lot of city not investing in that area of the city. But my mother worked there for a number of years, and then she transitioned to the job corps. She, like many people, wanted to get out of New York and sort of moved independently to Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple, to work at a job corps there. She learned how to drive in her 50s. But the interesting thing in all that is in becoming a teacher is that job corps, they really wanted her to earn a bachelor's, and that was important, and that was eventually one of the reasons why she ended up retiring, because she went through college to earn a bachelor's, and she really wanted to get a degree in nutrition and food science, but my mother never finished that degree. She was like 1 or 2 credits short. This is kind of like, when I think about this in the context of the transitioning program, these stories, they're like, maybe part of the reason why I feel so passionate about sort of our students having access to like science, technology, engineering, mathematics sort of programs in the university. She struggled a lot with that university, with the science courses that she had. She loved the class that she took by a well-known sort of Black woman sociologist, Joyce Ladner, who was also a civil rights activist in the context of the United States. But she didn't finish her degree because she had to meet economic, sort of social, family pressures. I think the thing is, for me, is that I never really dug deep into my mother's experiences. I sort of took that for granted. I think there's so much that I have to learn and to sort of think about in terms of equity and access in education for mature students. I also want to, thinking about another way of thinking through this is reflecting on all the conversations I've had over the years with students and with particular students within the transitional media program like ASH. And I have begun to think about that we really need, again, to excavate and document the lives of our mature students in these programs. There's not been as much work doing that. And it's really important that we hear their voices. And we sort of think about sort of what that has to teach us about equity and access in higher education. So I actually began to experiment with just thinking about maybe doing a podcast because we both love cooking. We both sometimes have that ritual where we can come in at the end of the day and we're sort of doing our cooking sort of at night, or we do the, and you like to do your Sunday bowl cooking. So both Ash and I like to do our Sunday bowl cooking, so we thought, well, maybe why don't we just try sort of cooking and talking, and maybe that could be the basis of a podcast. So I just thought I'd show you an excerpt, and again, through the sort of analysis of these narratives of students and their mature students, adults, in their journeys into through higher education, I think there's a lot for us to learn and reframe about equity and access. So I'll create an excerpt for that conversation. Let's say, I was joining high school, or middle school, middle school, when I started watching, someone was like, I should do this stuff. I was like, okay, fine. And I remember what I wanted to do with my lives. And I really wanted my lives expressed. Didn't know at the time. And the main persons, the military, and the recently. Okay, so it took 2 months from application to deployment. I was working some weird job, like my best friend was on me, it was like 2 weeks a week, finding weird files for hydro, really boring. But it was just like a filler, and I just said, you know what, out of high school, they told me, you're not going to go like, don't go to university, like, don't go to university, focus on college. I gave up my pursuit of sports, and then
didn't have any understanding of mental illness at that stage of my life, but early episodes, and sometimes was like, let's just see if I can get it. That was the understanding. Then I was really nice, went to the physical world, all of them went really well. And like I said, from the date of application to the date that they said you're scheduled to start basic training and standing up the back. Maybe set up the back. And you were able to do it, but I also didn't know anyone else. And just building this case for a week, 6 weeks, something like that. Had some really great conversations with some guys who are also trying to read. And they were like, you seem so great, you remember the kids, and you get a great attitude, and everything we get said. And so from there, I started getting excited and passionate about the idea of doing anything with kids. I thought, well, we're in childhood education, look at college programs. And we have a new program. And the very first thing that occurred to me was, wow, I could do this. I could make these work. And then I spoke to my cousin, she said, you have one for it. And she said, you should also try to get a job working with kids and stuff and see. This was around April, May 2002.
PC. Let's try this. Let's try it. Try it on.
You're on Zoom Chrome, it's a different tab.
I was on Zoom Chrome, but a different tab. So, I just want to, just in summarizing this sort of line, I just want to know more about the pressures my mother and mature students like Ashton face. You know, Ashton was talking about, I don't think he edited that part of the video, but basically he was encouraged not to go to university in high school. He was encouraged to maybe go to college. And when that doesn't seem to be an option, he thought, well, maybe I'll go to the military. Like, maybe that's sort of a better place for me to sort of begin my journey. And so it was sort of a long, sort of roundabout way of coming back to university and transitional year program sort of grew sort of his love of working with kids and with youth. But I want to know more, and I think we, in the research literature, we need to know more about how another action, how they navigate the challenges and the pressures, how they can earn a bachelor's degree will transform their lives, and ultimately, if it does, we need more narrative research that documents the lived experiences of mature students. Sort of more briefly, this is a bad example of a slide in terms of but just to tell you some of the, even writing a proposal for this research symposium, part of that we did a critical review of the literature. And, you know, this is no surprise that most of that literature, when we talk about recruitment, admission, retention, graduation policies in Canadian universities, it focuses on traditional age college students and university graduates, where mature students tend to be older and have more life experience, family, and work responsibilities. A range of, in terms of access and equity in times of crisis, there are a range of higher education policies related to admissions, financial aid, credentialing, that serve as barriers for mature students who want to access higher education. And these policies are even more likely to serve as barriers when they don't take into account crises or changing the nature and context of mature students' everyday lives, including their access to higher education. So there are things like, for instance, we'll have one of the paper presentations focused on sort of adults with precarious status. If your status is precarious, you cannot apply for Ontario Student Assistance Program in the province, and that's one of the primary means we even use to fund students in the transition year program. So that sort of precarious status is not sort of a result of just of what's going on in Canada, but also what's going on globally and in the world. We need to think about teaching and learning strategies. There's, and I think I sort of mixed this up, but I think basically there's a lot that we're not teaching about in terms of our teaching and learning strategies with mature students and how age, sort of experience, in terms of non-traditional sort of preparations, leaving school early, how that sort of might impact and may have us to think more about different pedagogical strategies and different ways of thinking of teaching and learning. There's some theory around particular like andragogy and other sort of adult learning theories that we have. I think that there's a lot more theorization that can be done. And certainly none of those theories were really established thinking about Black and Indigenous populations as their days or sort of mature students that are neurodivergent or have particular accessibility needs. All those theories are sort of assuming a sort of normative adult. This also relates to mature student retention and nutrition rates, and sort of meeting the needs of mature students. That there's a lot of work being done, and there's more, particularly the past decade, a lot of work around student services has grown. The sort of student services, what do I want to say, I don't know, system or resources that here at the University of Toronto, since I've been here in 2006, have grown immensely. But the question is whether or not they're really able to adapt to or meet the needs specifically of mature students, this target demographic. So there's a lot of, this is what we call in our graduate education, there are a lot of gaps in literature when it comes to sort of understanding and meeting the needs of mature students. And finally, I want to talk a bit about sort of the access programs themselves, of which the transitional year program is one. And, you know, there are lots of different ways of understanding the work of access programs. And there's also this question of if we were to sort of study and seek to better understand the impact of access programs for mature students, like what would we measure as the outcomes? Like how should we think of these programs being impactful? And one of the ways I sort of more recently began to sort of think this through is as a result of the work of a faculty member here, Rosalind Hampton, that's a member of a coalition of community archivists who are seeking really to document the work around student activism in our universities. And I was really struck by in this sort of work, there's a wonderful website called Coalition Building on Campus that tells a history of the transitional year program and the struggles that it has faced, and at the university, many you may or may not know, has attempted to close down the transitional year program on several occasions. Dr. Hampton and associates have done a lot of archival work looking at how it's been documented in student newspapers. And so my reading that and thinking about the history really caused me to think through more of the way we're understanding the impact of access programs and what we would need to study, what kind of research we need to do on them. So on our website, we talk about, for instance, UIP beginning at Innocent College with approximately 25 students. In 1970, the program had its roots in the Black community in Toronto, and it emerged out of two community summer programs in 1969 and 1970. Served to prepare a small number of students for entry into New York University. This is the way, so this is what we have officially on our website. This is in the Coalition Building on Campus website, that archival research sort of reveals another sort of layer and way of understanding the transition year program. It's founded in 1969-70 to give economically and educationally disadvantaged students a chance at university education. The multiracial program emerged out of the Black Community Initiative, but came under attack in the 1970s following a review that called into question the reported curricular focus on Black studies. The story TYP thus emerges as a chapter in the struggle for Black studies in the university. At the university. So this is a very different, but important way of understanding the work of the transition year program, not just, providing a pathway to university, but really doing sort of through community activism work, making space for Black studies in your university curriculum. So I would argue that the history of CYP points to the need for research on university access programs that documents not only the program's impact on student academic and employment outcomes, and this is where the university is going in general now, so where a lot of our provincial funding is being tied to whether or not our graduates get jobs, and whether or not our graduates, win sort of academic accolades. But also the ways that access programs foster equity and accessibility through bold curricular and pedagogical initiatives. So in other words, access programs in many ways have for decades been shaping the very landscape of access in university and shaping the curriculum and making important sort of contributions to university curriculum and pedagogy in our classrooms. So those three strands, sort of the narrative, emerging narrative work of sort of mature students and their experiences, and the sort of critical review of literature, and then the evaluation, the documentation of access programs themselves has led to the objectives of the symposium. Which is to disseminate existing knowledge of mature students' access to higher education, identify gaps in literature that point to future research directions, and build a network of scholars and practitioners to support equity and access work for mature students across Canada and internationally. So the keynotes provide a rationale for the symposium and delve deeply into issues of access and equity in times of crisis, student support services, as well as future directions for research on apps, for future directions for research and policymaking. The paper sessions also address the gaps in literature on access and equity in times of crisis, as well as teaching and learning strategies for particular populations of mature students. And the roundtable provide an opportunity to learn about the strengths and limitations of university supports for mature students and discuss possibilities for using additional forms of support. So we're trying to cover all bases here. So thank you very much. I hope this provided a bit of a rationale and the thinking behind this symposium. And I think we have time for some questions or comments or.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Do you have one?
My check was once again here. Thank you so much, Dr. for the presentation. My question is just, Maybe general, but I'm curious to know, why is it that considering the level of value that mature students have with the water academic ecosystem, why has this area been under researched specifically? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, Mr. Shepard. Thank you.
I mean, I think I think there are a number of reasons, and I would be also curious if there are other sort of researchers and people, just thinkers in the audience, what their thoughts are. I think that at all times there are kind of considered the dominant and most important sort of populations that universities are supposed to sort of focus on. A lot of times has to do with sort of continuing the legacy of the university itself, not on sort of what the experience with the landscape is. And I think a lot of that just focuses on traditionally aged students. And I think the scholarship in higher education has also sort of followed that line of thinking about which populations we can focus on. It's also the same thing we could say, even specifically when I'm thinking about sort of, mature students, I'm thinking particularly about Black and Indigenous sort of mature students and sort of the histories and the barriers to access to university education in this country. I think some people don't even think that Canada ever had any barriers. So we haven't told that story very well. That's why Dr. Mathen's work is so important. It's documenting the student activism that has really created space. And has led to more activism. In other words, it's something that has to be fought for and won. It's not access, it's not. I think a lot of times we think of access through the lens of university policies and what are our admissions policies and how do you get in. I think that's one end that's important, but I think that the fact that access has to be won or it had to be fought for is, and we haven't documented that. That hasn't been the focus. I think, and arguably, I think that a higher education sort of research, I think that's still sort of an emerging area of research and what should be documented there. I think there's a lot of room in Black studies for us to focus on the experiences of students in education. Educating in the United States, I get a lot about, or I get a lot, but I've sort of had access to a lot of scholarship around the Little Rock Nine, sort of the integration of sort of U.S. people. That's again the story of these 18 to 24 non-mature students that what were their experiences of integrating predominantly white universities. So I think I don't know if that's a real specific answer, and I don't know if there are folks in the audience or other scholars in the audience that have a more sort of particular answer around that. I think that I just think that sort of scholarship in general, is a pretty narrow, often very colonial endeavor, and it just doesn't pay attention to the marginalized populations and the focus on those populations. But I also think that that's also the area of scholarship, like to ask the question, like why hasn't sort of the literature in higher education documented more on experiences? Interestingly, the last thing I'll say, rambling a bit, but even in my academic program, adult education and community development, I think there's a little bit of tension in that topic of mature students' access to higher education. Like we wanted to give that over to the higher education scholars. And that not being focused in our program, we do a lot more focus on non-formal, informal learning, spaces through activism, through community organizations. There are sort of students that come in, not necessarily faculty, that talk about sort of adult learning, sort of corporate settings, but that's not a focus on access accessing higher education. So I think that we're also through this symposium trying to make space in the field of adult education to look more at sort of access to higher education for teachers.
Right. And Ambrose, I'm coming from the transitional post-secondary education program at Fort Brown College, and so happy to be here today. I think one of the things that we have kind of been addressing in our last comment is, for me, there's always a tension around supporting students, mature students, or adult learners to access services, and actually, none of us came to school because we needed a social worker, wanted a social worker, we wanted to see ourselves in the curriculum, we wanted to see ourselves in the teachers, and in the community at college or university. And so I'm always feeling that tension. One of my roles is to be a counselor in that program, but I'm always wanting to have a counseling cycle and into a much bigger community. Like I love the words archive and history and community and mentorship. So I'm wondering if some of that may come up to either those service conversations or in your research or how that's informing those three buckets of inquiry.
Thank you so much for that comment, because you sort of nailed a tension that I did not sort of highlight. And I think it's true that another one of the lenses within higher education, with this access work, is really to see sort of and view adult learners, mature students as basically a marginalized population that needs particular services. And so the focus is always on the services. Services and the cost of those services. And can we fund that? Or what? So it's a big sort of merry-go-round. But I think you're nailing, and I think even through this symposium, and I think you just gave another way of looking about why it was so taken by sort of comprehensive work. Because, and others have done this, and others have talked about it, we have Stan Woodford, who's professor in the transitional year program, who also sort of holds a lot of history and spoken with me sort of about that. But I think that I want to bring that aspect of education and learning, into our access programs and use that as a lens of thinking about adult learners rather than just as sort of the needs of a particular population, the service needs of a particular population, right? I think that's why the point is, or at least one of the things I'm taking away from the Coalition on Campus sort of archival work is that transitional year programs have really created space and broke around curriculum and sort of broken down sort of those barriers, those walls between sort of the community and the university. Because part of the reason why when you read that sort of work on that website, part of what was I guess the word the first time seemed unacceptable by the program is that they actually wanted to employ and bring community educators into the space, into the university space. And usually we think like you have to have a PhD, you have to have these credentials, you have to sort of do this kind of work, and otherwise you don't really belong there, right? This is even what the struggle is for sort of mature students in STEM programs, like, or who want to go into the sciences. Like, talk to Nadia about this, and you'll hear some paper presentations, but it's kind of like that if you're adult, but you can't have an interest in science, you can't want to pursue like anything within science because you just don't have that background, you don't have the same sort of preparation, and therefore you couldn't even have the intellectual capacity or sort of want to pursue that. That's, so incredibly problematic and marginalizing, etc. So, yeah, I think it's a huge tension, and I have some programmatic ways that I've been thinking about, which is why I want always, I think, for instance, I think an access program, transition year program, should not just have courses that are like, always just like upgrading, or things with skills, or just always focused on, you know, even though it's important that we do that, here's the tension, meet financial need, it shouldn't always just be about meeting financial need, it should be about sort of, our, I don't know, arguably our experience as human beings, our lifelong learning, our sort of, our, education and sort of freedom broadly defined. So, yeah, I think that that's an excellent way of intention sort of in this work and even sort of thinking about sort of access. I think this is why, I guess this is maybe another reason why, again, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm putting things together. I've been sort of criticized in some presentations around access that sort of my work focuses too much on sort of admission to university. And a number of students are saying, and people are trying to say that sort of the area of study of access shouldn't just focus on admission and sort of meeting needs and sort of credentialing, that it needs to focus more broadly on our experience and access to education and curriculum and sort of learning and being able to, as you said, to sort of having opportunities to see ourselves sort of in the curriculum. So thanks for that. Okay, so one more question, but maybe we can, seems like we're out of time. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I hope that you enjoy today and have bring lots of questions and insights from your own work. Again, this is a sort of an emerging area, and especially when it's an emerging area, we need all of your sort of thoughts and inputs to sort of have it grow. And I think we have a couple of comments about the paper sessions and